Given the fact that we now have the virus in our hands, it is quite possible, in fact, it's invariable, that we will develop a vaccine for AIDS.
Fauci's reign begins in 1984. Everything changes in 1984.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen.
Robert Gallo held a press conference in which it was declared by the U.S. government that the U.S. government had found the cause of AIDS at the National Cancer Institute where Gallo worked.
The probable cause of AIDS has been found, a variant of a known human cancer virus.
And that it was to be called human immunodeficiency virus, HIV. The same year, 1984, Fauci becomes the director of the NIAID.
This saw the rise of Dr. Fauci to his current stardom.
I would like to introduce Dr. Anthony Fauci, who is the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases since 1984.
Dr. Fauci understood that he could basically save his government agency by defining AIDS as an infectious disease. His agency within the NIH is all about the study of allergies and infectious diseases. And infectious diseases were kind of on the way out because they'd mostly been conquered by the time Fauci came along, needing to reopen the spigot of funding for his agency and his allies in Big Pharma.
Mr. President and Commissioners, that it is clear that very soon, certainly within this calendar year, in the United States, we will be doing early phase 1 testing for safety in vaccines. We have NIH-funded, federal government-sponsored vaccine evaluation units. It's a good collaboration between industry, the federal government, and academia.
What's not known to most people, and would be surprising to many, not all, is that Dr. Fauci and others at the NIH are in partnership. They have patents, pharmaceutical patents, and they're in partnership with the companies. Their official job is to serve the public interest. But that has been sort of set aside, brushed away as if that's only a formality.
The 1985 Dole Act allowed NIAID and Dr. Fauci personally to file patents on the hundreds of new drugs that his agency-funded PIs were incubating, and then to license those drugs to pharmaceutical companies and collect royalties on their sales. My uncle Teddy deliberately and purposely brought in as his chief administrative aide Terry Byrne, who was the first openly gay administrative aide on Capitol Hill. He was also the first openly HIV-infected administrative aide on Capitol Hill, and this was very controversial at that time because people were terrified of being exposed even to people who they believed were maybe infected with HIV.
Think about it. Here we had this new disease that you could have without being aware of it. This gave rise to media scare stories about getting AIDS from toilet seats and stuff like that.
The public seems to have its toughest time in separating fact from fiction.
Can children contact AIDS by drinking fountains?
I would like to know if you can contact AIDS by kissing, touching, or just being around someone that has the disease.
Well, as you know, there have been reports that the virus can occasionally be found in saliva.
And in New Jersey, officials say that they will allow school superintendents to suspend students, teachers, or other staff who are suffering from AIDS.
There is considerable talk about mandatory reporting of all AIDS cases and required blood tests, and much agonizing over the question of quarantine.
Well, for example, if the close contact of a child is a household contact, perhaps there will be a certain number of cases of individuals who are just living with and in close contact with someone with AIDS, or just the ordinary close contact that one sees in normal interpersonal relationships. If that's the case, then indeed the implications for the spread to even other groups besides infants and children become something that needs to be reckoned with. So I think it is going to have a major impact on our thinking about what the real confines of the syndrome will be.
And when I say Anthony Fauci is essentially a social engineer, I mean that. Because what he does He re-engineers how people think of human contact, touch, intimacy.
You know about pregnancy?
Mm-hmm.
You know how I feel about responsibility?
Yes.
How much do you know about AIDS?
We have a long way to go in the fight against HIV, the virus that causes AIDS. HIV is spread by sharing needles and through sex with an infected person.
When it came to sex, Cindy was the life of the party. She went from one partner to another, until one day she met a partner who'd stay with her for the rest of her life. AIDS. Don't experiment with sex. If you do, use a condom, or being the life of the party could be the death of you.
The scourge of AIDS is fast becoming the most socially charged health issue of the decade.
What you see there is a kind of, I would say, almost like an earthquake moment in time in American culture, biology, virology, politics, everything.
It was a disease that was so horrendous and terrifying that it necessitated people staying away from each other. No more sexual contact, no more casual sexual contact.
Not only sex, all forms of human contact. And now all of a sudden, as though a switch is turned, now it represents death and potentially murdering somebody that you love. I mean, these are really radical ideas and very dark ideas.
Given the long incubation period of this disease, we may be starting to see, as we're seeing virtually as the months go by, other groups that can be involved, and seeing it in children is really quite disturbing.
It used to be that Anthony Fauci, Robert Gallo, and all of them told the American people, if you test positive today, you are probably going to die within 6 months to a year. Then it became 3 years, then it became 5 years, then it became 10 years, and they kept stretching it and stretching it.
You needed to be tested in order to know that you have it, and you needed to be tested with PCR technology. Does this sound familiar? And its inventor, Kerry Mullis, was beside himself with anger that it was being used to diagnose people with HIV, which was then supposed to lead inexorably to AIDS. He spoke out against this at the time.
Guys like Fauci get up there and start talking, he doesn't know anything really about anything, and I'd say that to his face. Nothing. The man thinks you can take a blood sample and stick it in an electron microscope, and if it's got a virus in there, you'll know it. He doesn't understand electron microscopy, and he doesn't understand medicine, and should not be in a position like he's in.
He repeatedly said, including on tape, you should not use the PCR test to diagnose clinical infection with viruses. He repeatedly said that. What are we doing? Using the PCR test to distinguish clinical diagnostic tests with viruses.
They've got a personal kind of agenda. They make up their own rules as they go. They change them when they want to. And they smugly, like Tony Fauci, does not mind going on television in front of the people who pay his salary and lie directly into the camera.
When Bob Gallo proved that it was the etiologic agent in 1984, we had a diagnostic test approved by the FDA in 1985. That was really quick, from literally less than a year from the time that it was shown to be the virus that causes this disease.
My mentor as a young undergraduate actually traveled with Bob Gallo to the Pasteur Institute and met with Luc Montagnier and brought back their DNA isolate that could be used to produce the AIDS virus.
Luc Montagnier sent a biological sample, let's just say, to Robert Gallo for his feedback in 1983. Robert Gallo famously held those demonstrably same proteins up at the press conference where he declared that HIV had been found in his lab and was the cause of AIDS.
Credit must go to our eminent doctor, Robert Gallo.
A massive battle ensued.
I went over to Montagnier afterwards and I said, I can't find a reference. I can't find a reference to go with the statement, HIV is the probable cause of AIDS. I'm sure you can help me. He said, why don't you use the NIH, like the CDC report? And I said, well, I looked at that, and that was not a scientific paper. And the people standing around, by the way, who were his colleagues there, looked at him like they were thinking he should come up with a better answer, but he couldn't.
Luc Montagnier was always an interesting figure and always a thorn in the side of the orthodoxy.
HIV by itself, or some strains of HIV, are not sufficient to induce AIDS. Even from the beginning, actually, we thought maybe for the activation of that virus in cells, we need some cofactors.
Cofactors are not necessary.
I think a lot of the data point to, at best, HIV being a cofactor, and one of the human herpes viruses may play a key role in the development of that disease to the extent that it is attributable to a virus infection. Nevertheless, Dr. Fauci, of course, has been long committed to the belief system that HIV is the sole cause of an immunodeficiency virus syndrome.
There was a war that I covered from the first shot fired, which was in 1987 with Peter Duesberg's paper, that most people do not know took place. A war that took place over the soul of American science, the classical science world where you have to prove what you're saying, and not until you've proven it do you move forward. And the postmodern, post-Faucian, industrial, hyper-monetized, hyper-propagandized, non-scientific world.
HIV cannot be the cause of AIDS because it doesn't infect enough cells and isn't active enough. It's only found in 1 out of 8,000 T cells.
It's really unfortunate because what he's doing, he's creating a tremendous amount of anxiety in the people who are infected because they think that there's some conspiracy among scientists against them. It really is very unfortunate. And coming from him, he has some qualifications. Something happened to him in his thinking over the past couple of years. I don't know what it is.
HIV was never present by any means in all cases of AIDS, but Anthony Fauci made sure that there was a perfect correlation by eliminating about 5,000 HIV-negative AIDS cases. There was a conference in Amsterdam in the early 1990s, an AIDS conference. Doctors started to go to the podium in a session where they were talking about HIV-negative AIDS, and they began to say, yeah, I have some too. I have a clinical AIDS patient, has every symptom, but tests negative on every test, no matter how many times they test. And so there was a clamor, there was a sense of anxiety. Wait a minute, what is this? Could it be? Could it be that Peter Duesberg is right? And Anthony Fauci flew in on Air Force 2 to that conference, and he did his thing, and he quashed it. He just quashed it. He gave a statement through Newsweek that this just wasn't an issue. It was a misunderstanding. And what they did at that moment was they took all of the HIV-negative AIDS cases and they renamed them and threw them out of the official definition.
In a brazen move to explain away the anomaly of AIDS without HIV, Dr. Fauci declared that the unexplained AIDS cases represented a new disease. To avoid suspicion that his, quote, new disease, end quote, was, after all, chronic fatigue syndrome, Dr. Fauci labeled his discovery idiopathic CD4 plus lymphocytopenia, or ICL. In this tongue twister, idiopathic means of unknown source.